Hello, I am Kwagala and welcome to Focus on Parliament. The national carrier, Uganda Airlines, is once again trapped in a sea of troubles and scandals, this time round after the Parliamentary Committee on Commissions, Statutory Authorities and State Enterprises unearthed evidence suggesting gross mismanagement and wastage, and thus casting doubt on the long-term sustainability of the revamped project. With me in studio, I have Mr. Ernest, Talwana, who is a social commentator and a lawyer, to discuss this topic. Ernest, it's a pleasure to have you. Say hello to the viewers.
Hello viewers, good morning everyone, glad to be here.
How have you been?
I've been well, can't complain really.
Awesome. So let us discuss in detail the findings of the COSASE committee regarding the operations of the revamped Uganda Airlines. We understand that this initiative was revived in the year 2019 after a long spell of suspension of its operations. But we are now greeted to perennial, consistent challenges, among which is gross mismanagement and the wastage of the public resources which are being injected in the project. But let us start from the basics. What is your overview of the project, first and foremost, the Uganda Airlines?
I believe Uganda Airlines was a sensible measure. Rather, the revival of the airline was a sensible measure, because it goes without saying that majority of the three East African countries had their own, I'll just say three East African countries had a carrier in the 1970s. This was East African Airlines, and then when the ESC collapsed in 1977, Kenya Airways was formed around that time, and obviously Kenya Airways is now well known. It's one of the significant carriers in the region. It is a member of SkyTeam, which is a large membership inclusive of KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. So you could see that if we had been a stable environment as of the time, we would be having a significant carrier as of now. You can also mention Ethiopian Airlines that started earlier on. I believe in the 40s, I could be wrong, but yes. So it goes without saying that an airline is significant in connecting various parts of the world, and Uganda Airlines revival made sense. However, I will say that an airline is a mixed bag. Because of the sensitivity of the aviation industry, you can find that we are not alone in all these complexities. Even the largest carriers in the world suffer from various issues, from procurement to profitability to attracting top talent. It is a very cutthroat industry. So Uganda Airlines is not alone. If anything, because it is a young airline, it will suffer plenty of setbacks before it stamps itself as a significant airline in the region and across the continent.
But Ernest, 5 years, half a decade since the revival of this project, and we are not yet in a position where we can even meet the baseline operational costs of the business. Is it still viable for the country?
Yes and no. I will not give a direct answer, because it's a very layered conversation. You'll find that even the most profitable airlines in the world significantly suffered setbacks in the beginning, from sourcing to aviation fuel to marketability and all that. I cannot confidently say that Uganda Airlines is not on a right track. It is. They're marketing themselves. I do see they're pushing themselves on an international market. They're on multi-choices platforms and the like. So yes, obviously you could argue that it is not doing well at the time, but well, airlines bleed a lot of money. You cannot mention an airline out there that does not bleed money, from the largest airlines like Delta to the likes of Lufthansa to the likes of Emirates. The only common factor is that they are airlines operating within extremely large economies. So they have the economies of scale to keep them afloat. But in terms of profitability, very countable airlines that are profitable, even within Africa. I can think of only Ethiopian Airlines that is profitable. South African Airlines has had to undergo multiple business rescue initiatives from the South African government. At some point, they had to consider public-private partnership to keep them afloat, and various other forms of rescue to keep the airline afloat. So, Uganda Airlines, it's not something that spells doom and gloom. It's something that just needs continuous government effort to keep it afloat. But I would say that it's a necessary measure. There are certain parts of the world that cannot be easily accessed for a country without having a direct airline bringing in industrialists and tourists and all the like that is necessary for a country's growth.
Let us focus on the aspect of what you describe as the continuous government intervention or assistance in ensuring that the business stays viable and sustainable. So, the Auditor General for the financial year 2024-2025 has examined critically the operations of the Uganda Airlines, our national carrier, and he has very interesting, albeit adverse, findings. One of which is that this business is being grossly mismanaged by its top management. They have greatly inflated the costs with respect to procurement and other expenses, but also the technical aspects of the business. It seems that we have people who do not seem to exactly know what to do regarding, let's say, the aircraft that were purchased initially, the two bombardiers, because now there are revelations that the spare material or parts for this aircraft is not readily available on the market, thus adversely impacting on the operations of the airlines. So, how can we make progress if you are pushing for continuous government intervention, yet we have an incompetent team managing the business?
Yes, obviously the COSASE report and Auditor General's report are pretty damning, but I would be reasonably critical and not extremely critical of them. Yes, there are obviously issues related to claims that they were not rightly qualified and the like, and the costs are grossly overstated. But again, I will say this: an airline is a very complex industry. It has multiple moving parts. It is not as simple as saying that you're not doing the right thing. Yes, you could argue that, but I mean, even with the argument about the CRJ 900, which they procured around 2019. And the fact that now there are no parts, we have to understand that at that time it was justifiable to procure CRJ 900s because that was what was within Rwanda's fleet at the time, and what benchmarking, and we believed that it would be prudent to acquire CRJ 900s because they were relatively affordable and were a young airline. We needed affordability at the time. Even what people called grossly expensive, I mean, buying an Airbus or buying a Boeing at the time is extremely expensive for a young airline. So they were working within their means, and I find that reasonable. Finding out that the parts can't be procured anymore, I mean, that's outside our control. Who could have predicted at the time? We felt that we're doing the right thing, and obviously there are a lot of forces outside our control within the airline industry. At the end of the day, we're just a low-income country that is developing and looking to stamp ourselves on the international market. Mitsubishi buying Bombardier is not within our control. That is, Bombardier is a Canadian company, and obviously that is within the power of the Canadian government and Canadian private actors and the board of Bombardier to decide what is best for them, and they decided Mitsubishi to procure, and probably the Mitsubishi board from Japan decided otherwise and said, let's end this line and focus on a new line. of aircraft, and you cannot claim that our board, our Uganda Airlines board, can control that. They can only work within what's within their power, and I cannot be too critical of that. I understand the claims of overstated costs and incompetence, but sometimes you have to cut these people slack. We are relatively young in the industry, and we're trying to figure ourselves out within a lot of global dynamics that are outside of our power. And yes, criticism is welcome. I'm not a person who would say that criticism should not be meted out. I mean, criticism is what encourages discussion, but sometimes we should be reasonably measured in the kind of criticism we give out.
About criticism, because unlike with all the other government enterprises, the president unusually has come out strong to also join the fray in criticizing the Uganda Airlines and its operations. And one would wonder, because in 2019, when the business was revived, the president took a lead in overseeing the appointment of the new management team, of course through the line minister, who is the Minister for Works and Transport. And the president is on record consistently defending this team, especially the executive director, Ms. Bamutulachi. But now it seems that she has since fallen out of the favor and the good graces of the president. So should we excuse incompetence simply because the complexities of this business are so varied and so widespread that as a young economy we are trying to navigate how to go about it? How do we now rescue the business from collapsing altogether?
Criticism against a CEO is justified. I will not say that she should not be criticized. Her and her board deserve criticism, but it should not be so extreme that we cannot acknowledge other factors, extenuating factors outside their control. Such factors exist and you cannot dismiss them. Obviously, the president has to juggle multiple interests, and I understand his criticism towards her and her board, even if he is the one who appointed them. He obviously has a populace to give accountability to. He has parliament to give accountability to. So the criticism, by all means, is justified. But obviously, you have to juggle other bits and pieces. Should her board receive fire? Yes. Should it be well measured, and should it be backed by facts? Yes, I believe it should be backed by facts. We have to understand all, like I mentioned before, all the other factors, like the Bombardier's change in management with Mitsubishi procuring them, the end of that line of aircraft by Bombardier, and they're purchasing, rather not purchasing, they're focusing on a different line of aircraft. Can we afford to go for the top shelf? Can we afford to go for the top shelf aviation manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus? I do not know. I cannot say for sure because I'm not privy to those matters. But at the end of the day, we obviously can met out criticism, but we should temper it reasonably because, again, the airline industry is a very complex one, and as much as criticism can be justified, it should also be weighed against other extenuating factors.
Should the executive director of the airlines and the board stay?
They should stay, but they should be given more grace, because as much as many are calling for their heads, they're calling to ask them, who can you bring in that would suddenly change all the factors outside our control? There's a lot that is outside our control.
How about we hired an expatriate, for example? Because previously we had one and he was fired under very unclear circumstances. Actually, it is alleged that because of the infighting in the internal management team, that motivated the decision to have him fired. So how about we really stuck to a meritorious recruitment process, and we had a person that is competent to serve in that role, even if it's a foreigner? Wouldn't it show up the fortunes of the business?
I would love to agree, but again, I know this sounds like fence sitting, and it is, but I want to go with a yes and no, because let's be honest. A foreigner would come in and they're not aware of our politics. They'll probably not be as pliable, so they would arguably want to stick with facts on ground, and that would make sense. But we have to acknowledge how our country works.
It wouldn't work.
It would, but it would be complicated because, again, I'm trying to be pragmatic here, and let me stick to being pragmatic. Our country's politics are rather complex, and that's why you find that there's someone who is brought in from within the country who is more pliable. Does it mean that meritocracy is binned? Yes, there's that is sacrificed, but again, we can focus on meritocracy, and I agree meritocracy matters, but meritocracy should also be weighed against the realities of our country. Our country is one whereby pliability matters. Someone who is willing to bend with the forces that exist. If you want to be a hard nut to crack, it just makes everything complicated. It just makes it hard. But obviously, as an airline, it should be said that meritocracy matters. It should be said that someone who understands the business matters, and I believe the Ugandans who do understand the business, even if you're to say get rid of her, bringing in someone who has the technical know-how within the airline industry would be necessary. But again, I'll say this: bringing in someone who's a hard nut to crack would also be complicated. So there are a lot of factors to weigh, and that's why in most hiring processes there's obviously a checklist to consider. So I will say this much, that yes, meritocracy will matter, but you'll have to also weigh it against a lot of other factors and the status quo and how Uganda as a country works.
So before we go into the break, the executive director of Uganda Airlines indicated during the interface with Parliament that they have put in a request to purchase 6 more aircraft to boost their business and then expand their reach so that we can have more routes for the airlines across the globe. But the question is, given the nature of our economy as a country and also the realities and the dynamics of the aviation sector internationally, do you think that we have a chance in that pool? Should we expand, or we should rather downsize?
I believe we should measure us. We should temper ourselves with reality. Without a doubt, we need to obviously look internationally and look to attract people to our market, and that's why obviously getting more aircraft matters. There's a certain way, if you notice, it is harder to bring someone into Uganda if there are too many connecting flights. It's tedious, it's exhausting. If someone has to connect through Dubai or through Johannesburg or through Kigali or through Nairobi, or let me say Cairo or Addis to come to Kampala. Sorry, not Kampala, Entebbe. It becomes tedious. So an airline like Uganda Airlines helps to ease that movement and reduce those bottlenecks and connecting flights. It makes it easier for anyone who is willing to come and understand our market, come and look at our market, come and understand our dynamics and see the potential we have to choose Uganda Airlines. So I understand their need for more aircraft, and I see the rationale for it. And obviously, I believe they will obviously have constant debates amongst themselves and before Parliament with regard to their financing and with regard to the feasibility of future routes, and that makes sense. But I wouldn't be so skeptical to say no, we do not need more routes or we do not need more aircraft. It is necessary because at the end of the day, brand Uganda matters, and to invest in brand Uganda means that plenty of money will have to be put into it. So again, I'll say that taking on more aircraft makes sense.
Ernest, that has a corresponding financial implication. At the moment, we are grappling with a very huge debt cost for financing the operations of these airlines, and it is projected that that debt is going to balloon with time. So how do we then embark on an initiative to expand the fleet of the airlines and then incur more costs and debt?
It's an ongoing debate, and I cannot give a simple answer right now. I will say, I mean, I'm saying ongoing debate, but yes, it's ongoing in public and private spaces. And I will say that it will have to be tempered with reality. I mean, if in a given financial year we do not have the money for it, and this debt will obviously have to probably push it to the next financial year or the next financial year after that, or dependent on what the context provides. So yes, it is expensive, but as many people say, it takes money to make money. So without a doubt, we'll have to spend money.
We should run the risk.
I mean, there's no outcome that you can get both good or bad without some risk. Risk is necessary. You cannot avoid risk in our world. We live in a capitalist world, and a capitalist world needs risk. Risk obviously will come with both mistakes and with some wins and a mixed bag, but it's necessary. Maybe we'll just have to learn how to mitigate certain risks, but we need to take the risks. As a country, we need to grow, and growth comes with certain risks, certain risks.
Interesting perspective by Mr. Talwana Ernest, my guest for today's edition of Focus on Parliament. We take a short break. We'll be back shortly. Do stay with us.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. In this segment, we continue examining the findings of the Auditor General's report and the ensuing COSASE deliberations with respect to the operations of the Uganda Airlines, our national carrier. With me in studio, I have Mr. Talwana Ernest to discuss this topic. Ernest, we seem to be in a very difficult position as a country regarding the operations of our national carrier, but let us reflect back in time in the 70s when it was still the Uganda Airlines under the stewardship of Idi Amin Dada, a dictatorial president. But it is reported widely that then the business was actually profitable for the country. So we want to interrogate the dynamic of politics and how it affects the performance of the airline business. Do you think it has a bearing?
Politics has a bearing on the management, but profitability is majorly out of their control. Profitability depends on competition with other players within the market. I know that in the 70s there's likely not as many players as there are now. The sandbox is the sandbox generally has more parties within than compared to then. There are far more airlines crisscrossing the continent and crisscrossing the world as of now compared to then. There are plenty of airlines in Southern Africa, in North Africa, in West Africa, especially Nigeria has plenty of regional players within there, and also East Africa. East Africa is relatively young in comparison. We don't have many airlines, but internationally there's so many, and I do not have ready information on the profitability as of the 70s, but as of now I'm certain that it's genuinely more cutthroat, and I cannot say for certain that politics can have much of an influence. The politics can genuinely make it more efficient, can make it cleaner, can make it easier for management to understand what it's supposed to do. But again, at the end of the day, then the parties you attract are mostly people who are entering your country and want to find an easier route into your country and want to come here and do trade and do business or to tour. And in a sense, obviously, I can see where politics makes sense. It makes it cleaner to navigate your country's dynamics. And obviously the many people call back to the Idi Amin era, but I mean Idi Amin's era was a very terrible time, and I do not want to look too much on it as though it was a better time. If anything, we exist in a equally complicated time, but there's more potential now and there's more chance of growth now compared to back then.
Okay, so let us now discuss the aspect of the business model to implement with respect to this business, because as we speak today presently, the airline is entirely owned and managed by the state. But there are some voices who think that maybe we should be more open to new ideas, since we already exist in a capitalist world. Like you said, maybe we open up a window for the private investors to come and then invest in the business, fashion a public-private partnership, and then we expand the scope of the operations and also have it more capitalized, but also to reduce the burden on the public coffers. What have you got to say about that?
There's sense in that, and I agree. There's sense in likely listing ourselves on the Nairobi Stock Exchange, on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, to attract more private investors into our airline. That does make sense, but we have to understand that a public-private partnership will take time. Partnership will take time to materialize, because again, private players are capital oriented and they are profit oriented. So they might set high objectives for us, which we maybe cannot hit now, because again, even with airlines like Kenya Airways, it's a government that holds majority of the stake within it, and they're the ones that obviously come in now and again when they need to intervene when there's a credit crunch within the airline. And I will say that it is a necessary measure, and I agree that obviously we probably, or rather definitely, need to look at private players in the near future. But even with the profitable airlines like Ethiopian, it's a government that has majority of the shares within the airline, and they hold majority control within it. And there are certain risks that a government is willing to take. There's a certain amount of capital that a government is willing to invest in. Private players might be skeptical too, unless they're really large investors, like maybe the Qataris, the Emiratis, and the Saudis. But actually not but, and yes, again, I will agree that private players can be brought in, but for now we can play it simple. We can do the simple things like listing publicly on stock exchanges and the like, to try and attract more capital.
Do you feel satisfied that we have done sufficient benchmarking as a country from the more experienced, reputable, and perhaps profitable players in this sort of business?
I believe we have. Yes, I certainly believe we have, and I believe we are trying to play it sensible. We have tried our best to obviously market ourselves. We market ourselves internationally. We now have a gate at Gatwick. It was playing on my tongue.
London.
Yes, we now have a dedicated gate at Gatwick in London, and that definitely shows ambition. We fly to Johannesburg, we fly to China, we fly regionally to Dar es Salaam, to Nairobi, to Kigali. We also fly to
The Middle East?
to Abuja. Yes, in the Middle East we fly to Dubai. Yes. So we are playing it sensible. We are going routes that matter to us at the moment. We are not trying to be too ambitious, but we're being ambitious. I mean, we cannot jump and say now we want to fly to DC or New York. I don't know if we have the numbers that make sense for such measures at the moment, or such routes. But I mean, that's something to debate in the next 20 years or so. But yeah, I believe that they've done sufficient benchmarking, and as of now, what they're doing makes sense and it is reasonable. Obviously, there can be criticism about top management, but again, management will always receive criticism regardless of the organization, and that's not new.
So aside the management aspect, which other area do you feel that we need critical improvement in order to have a more reputable and perhaps profitable airlines business?
I will say that marketing is the most significant thing we need to do now, and that's what we are already doing. Marketing is important. Obviously need to have a dedicated hub in Entebbe. We obviously a hub that curates Uganda well and pushes brand Uganda to the best of its ability. And obviously I believe Uganda Tourism Board is already doing that, and that is something I can commend. Obviously there's more work to be done, there's more effort to be put, and there's more professionalism and, should I say, a bit of class to be added. But that is something that develops over time, and I cannot be too critical of that. But marketing is a thing that I can say they can do better, and I believe they're doing that. So I cannot be too critical. All I can ask of them is to be deliberate and to be near obsessive with their efforts.
Don't you feel that we have a serious challenge in the approach? For example, our counterparts, Rwanda Air, have taken with respect to the marketing aspect of their business.
I understand why a lot of Ugandans compare ourselves with Rwanda, because it's a small country. Our governments have a strong relationship, and a strong but complicated relationship. And I see the reason why we compare ourselves with Rwanda. So yes, I can argue that we can look to them and see what we can take on. But because I'm a Ugandan, I will constantly back Uganda, and I will say that Uganda has more potential than Rwanda, and I believe it does, and that's something I'll stand by. What we can do is understand our potential and see how we can build the potential. We have the potential to go far as Uganda and to stand out as Uganda. If we are deliberate about it, if we are very intentional, and we can put brand Uganda out there. Rwanda, for all its merits, again, is a small market. Uganda is a very big market, and Uganda can definitely do more with what it has. And obviously I'm biased as a Ugandan, and I obviously back Uganda, and I will say that Uganda has more to offer, and it certainly does if we are deliberate about regional flights, because last I read they are considering regional flights, and that is something I can definitely cheerlead, and I can definitely see it working. I mean, there's a Virunga Mountains, and if they can develop the aerodrome in Kisoro, regional flights can be taken there, and it will make it easier to access gorilla trekking in the Virunga Mountains and the like. If regional flights to various parts of Uganda, including Karamoja, can also be considered, that would be wonderful. Last I read, there's a partnership with the Emiratis to develop an airfield in Karamoja, which would be wonderful, considering there's Kidepo Valley National Park there. Yes, there's plenty of potential in Uganda. Uganda is a large country. Even I don't know why we sell ourselves short by comparing ourselves to Rwanda. We can do more than Rwanda. We have more potential compared to Rwanda, and genuinely, I'm a person who push Uganda because I am a Ugandan, and I believe that Uganda can do more with what it has.
So let us revisit the component of the interactions between COSASE and the management of the Uganda Airlines. It is now emerging that management has inflated some costs. Let's say fuel, which is now being costed double the actual amount. And now that has resulted into a debt of 14 billion. It was initially 24 billion, but we have cleared a certain part of that debt. We now have an outstanding sum of 14 billion to pay. And this is something that the management has admitted before Parliament. How do we address such challenges? Because you see, this is now an injury that is self-inflicted by the management of the business. How do we go about this?
I will say this. I feel like the management of Uganda Airlines sometimes sells themselves short. What can they give? Can they give justified reasons why they've inflated the costs? Because at times you have to acknowledge inflationary pressures from both international markets. Okay, let me ignore domestic markets for now. Majorly from international markets. International markets.
They have highlighted that, I think, some sort of depreciation in the shilling vis-a-vis the dollar.
Yes,
but I don't think it's a satisfactory reason to account for this humongous figure.
I mean, that again, I will say that they need to be strong at making their stance, because we have to acknowledge that the shilling depends on a dollar a whole lot, and obviously a lot of international payments are made in the US dollar. So how the shilling relates to the dollar influences a lot of certain costs, and in a sense they need to push that rhetoric, because yes, you can say, oh, it's inflated. What's causing this inflation? You can definitely back yourself and say, our relationship with the dollar is influences a lot of the certain costs, and it obviously it needs to be dynamic, and COSASE needs to acknowledge this, and both parties need to understand this. I know. Obviously, we live in a country where many people be critical of corruption, and they justifiably so, but again, we have to acknowledge that inflationary pressures exist, and especially in the airline industry where aviation fuel is heavily outsourced. You have to understand that influences a lot of costs, and also you have to understand that parking fees at different airports also influences costs, and sourcing for parts that has been a heated debate obviously on social media and whatnot. Can obviously come into play, but I want to extend more grace. I know it's easy to pile on them and to criticize them, but I choose to extend more grace, understanding how complicated the airline industry tends to be.
So, Ernest, as we conclude the program, what do you think, in concrete terms, can be done by, number one, the government, which is the principal overseer and regulator and owner, by the way, of this business on our behalf as Ugandans. Then secondly, by the management itself, to see that they are more efficient, more responsive to the times and the ever-evolving dynamics of the business, and then with the Ugandans to support this initiative.
Well, there should be more open financial reporting. Every end of the financial year, there should be more open financial reporting, because Uganda Airlines is a public company, and there should be more transparency. Transparency helps. It helps people understand the dynamics. Obviously, the average Ugandan will be critical nonetheless, but transparency helps a whole lot, especially for those who understand the industry better. It helps us have more well-informed debates. It helps us understand the complexities of the industry, and obviously the company can do what it can do best: be efficient with its management, pay suppliers on time. If paying suppliers on time becomes complicated, there can be justifications for that. And yeah, at the end of the day, financial reporting equally helps us understand what is going on. Full disclosures, or rather reasonable disclosures, matter, and the like. I mean, for followers of the airline industry, they can obviously pick and source this information if it is made available. And it goes without saying that it matters that people know what is happening, because at the end of the day, we are taxpayers, and we are very critical of how our tax shillings are spent. And yeah, it will be a constant discussion, one that is needed, and one that I feel will enrich both parties if they understand what is going on, because we don't exist in fairy tales. There will be difficulties as long as the airline exists, as long as you're competing with other regional and international players. But full disclosures and reporting will help us understand better.
I must appreciate you, my guest, Mr. Talwana Ernest, for your incisive insights on this topic, touching on the operations of the Uganda Airlines. Many thanks to you, our esteemed viewers, for watching and for your company. Much appreciation to the production unit for keeping us live on air. Our esteemed viewers, please do engage us on our various social media platforms. We are on X, we are on Facebook. You can watch this program and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.